What's going on, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Adventures in DevOps. I'm your host, Will Button. Joining me in the studio, my co-host, back on a streak, making Tom Brady look like a slacker, Warren Parad. Welcome, Warren.
And thanks for letting me come back for another week. I'll have my hopes up that it will keep on going. I'm Warren. I'm the CTO of Authorist, just to reintroduce myself. I like how this is going so far, and I have no plans to coward my way out of the future.
Right on. I'm excited to hear that, because otherwise it's just me and the guest, and that can always lead to trouble. Speaking of guests, joining us today, Pete Fritchman, SRE Infrastructure, Staff Infrastructure Engineer over at Observe Inc. And Pete has joined us today to talk about observability in those pesky internal applications that we all have. And I don't know, it might be a love-hate relationship there. But Pete, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Right on. So tell us a little bit about your background, because you've got the staff engineer title, which takes a while to get to, and is also, I think, a little bit uncommon on the infrastructure side. You know, it's pretty common on the software engineering side, but I think it's a little more rare to see staff engineers on the infrastructure side. So tell us how you got to that point.
Sure. I've been doing this for a long time. I got into computers as a kid, which I guess is more common these days, maybe less so in the 90s, but I knew early on as a kid that I wanted to do computer stuff, and I wasn't exactly sure what computer stuff was. Something with programming. I enjoyed that kind of, make the computer do what I want aspect of things. I was really lucky to land an internship at my local ISP in like 8th grade, the summer after 8th grade, before 9th grade.
Oh, no way.
Had a great mentor there. And I had done a mentorship like my 7th grade summer doing Linux stuff. And I bought a laptop and ran Linux on it. And running Linux on a laptop is a great way to become one with Linux, hate it, love it, whatever. And working at this ISP and having a really great mentor, George, kind of like, I realized, okay, sysadmin is the thing I'd like to do. Like, I enjoy debugging these problems and building things and writing automation. So, I did the high school thing. I worked all through high school. I've been a workaholic forever, for better or worse. Worked at this ISP all through high school. Went to college for a year. Wasn't my thing. It was fun socially, but the school part was just not. I don't know. I just lacked the focus. I just really wanted to work, right? So I had contributed a bunch to FreeBSD in my high school days. I was a ports committer, and ports are like the packages in FreeBSD. And through that, I landed a job in a really awesome group at FedEx doing system administration on everything internet facing. And it was a small group. And looking back, like, that was the group to be in at FedEx for doing Unixy stuff. They were definitely ahead of their time. Everything was automated. They wrote their own tools. And I thought this was very normal for like a 2002 shop, which now we know maybe wasn't. So the whole automation first thing has always just kind of been, how else would you do it, kind of thinking. And then I was lucky enough to land an SRE gig at Google after that in 2005. And then, they were like, hey, we should automate things. And I was like, well, yeah, how else would you do it, right? And then just from there, it's been a whirlwind of startups. And I tried the banking world for a little bit, had some fun there, had some not fun there. Ultimately decided to go back to the startup world, because I think that's my true, that's where for me, that's where the most fun is. The most fun I had at bank was kind of a startup in a bank, and that's very hard to find.
Oh, for sure.
So.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a huge, it's almost completely two separate, completely careers working at large enterprise organizations versus startups. Like, you have to have two different mental models to be successful at each of those.
It's almost two different skill sets. I mean, the base technical skill set, of course, and then, at a startup, you kind of have to pick up the pieces and lead the way with what you have. And then at a big enterprise, you have all the resources, but you also have all the politics. And so you have to, as much as, everyone I know hates it, you have to play, you have to make friends in other organizations and figure out how to influence people. And that part is hard and stressful. I enjoy the stress of tech, and the stress of that is just, it's a lot.
Yeah. It's a lot of political engineering versus software engineering.
Layer 8, right? Up to layer 7 is easy. Layer 8 is rough.
For sure. So when you started work at the ISP, are we talking back dial-up modem ISP?
Yeah, I sat in the extra room. I had PM2Es next to me, and those were quiet at least. And then I had a rack of 56Ks that were just, I'm pretty sure I could whistle my way into a 14.4 connection back then. Right. We were like the regional ISP, so we did T1s for businesses, and their big thing was they would put the I forget what Cisco it was, but there was something where you could take the T1 and I want to take some of my pairs and use them as phone lines and some of them as data. And that was revolutionary in 97. So people were all over that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was working in the telco industry right around then. And
nice.
Yeah.
And then we got, DSLAMs, and the whole DSL thing came through. And it was a fun way to get a lot of exposure to a lot of different things. I got to go to POPs and put stuff in. I got to build Unix boxes. I got to kind of do the whole gamut of things.
So you got the benefit of dealing with Y2K.
Yeah, it was such a non-event that people at work weren't even worried. Everyone was very much a realist there. They were like, whatever. If everything breaks, we just live in the world where nothing works. And, we patched our software. What more is there to do?
I knew people, I didn't know them very well or personally, but I knew people pre-Y2K that the area I lived in at the time, they built underground bunkers and stocked them. And they were going late December, they were going underground and saying, we're not coming out for 10 years or something. And I've never seen any of those people again. So I'm insanely curious.
Were they out January 3rd or are they still in? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't get to have I didn't know COBOL. I mean, there was a whole, crew of people that were just making insane money in projects on just the Y2K prep, needed or not. I mean, I feel like we'll hit that again in 2038 with 32-bit time T. That one is actually a little scary. I hope to be retired by then.
Right, no doubt.
Yeah, that seems like too much. Sure.
Cool. So talking about internal platforms and observability.
Yeah.
That was whenever this came across as our topic, I was like, that's just brilliant, because all of these little internal apps and sometimes not little internal apps, but the things that the company uses to make decisions about, are we doing the right thing or not? They often are just little pet projects. So what's your experience there, and how do you get those recognized as the valuable assets that they are?
Yeah, well, often it happens on its own, but it's the worst case of there's a catastrophic failure at the worst possible time, and everyone goes, "Oh, that was really important." I worked somewhere at a public company, and the system that did the closing the books every day, very boring, right? Well, it wasn't working, and it was taking 30 hours to close 24 hours worth of books, and obviously that doesn't work so well. And they kind of didn't notice it or take any action until they were a week before they had to do some SEC filing, quarterly thing. I don't know all the details, but it became suddenly on Friday afternoon it was, we need all hands on deck to fix this. But it's everything from that to not just necessarily apps, but internal infrastructure, right? CI and developer experience. And everyone's got these, shell script infrastructure that devs run to run the local cluster on their laptop. And there's, at any company, you can probably sit down and find a million of them. I just think they're perpetually under, the sexy part is production, right? People want to build SLOs for users and show awesome graphs and look at this great incident management process we have. Then they have this Jenkins instance that's barely holding on internally, that everyone hates, but no one really talks about because it's just, oh yeah, that's life, I just think that whole side of things just needs more love.
Yeah. And so I think part of that like you mentioned there, especially with like around Jenkins and things, it's like people who build tools to solve specific problems that they're having. And then it almost has like this organic growth of other people see it and they're like, oh yeah, I need to use that too. And then it grows in its role in the company. So how do you identify those before that catastrophic event?
Yeah, well, a lot. If you think about, so I do a lot of thinking about like how to compare it to production. So in production, if you say, I want to launch this new microservice or I want to consume this new AWS service, you write design docs, you have launch review. I mean, hopefully, right? Ideally, you have these things, and you have this whole like rigmarole and process for it. But internally, it's like, oh, I'm going to fire up an EC2 and run this new tool I downloaded. Hey, 2 weeks later, it's important. You have to apply that same principle, and part of it can be a staffing thing, right? Like, you might have this team of 1 million people working on prod, and then you got the two, the IT guys working on infrastructure stuff. That doesn't work very well at all.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think you have to put some process to it, and I think that I'm a big fan of the whole infrastructure management, incident management, postmortem process. Like, I think that is a great way to drive. Outages happen, and we all have to accept that nothing's 100%, but you should get the most out of every outage. So when your internal tool does blow up and cause a, company visible, everyone is like, hey, I don't really know what this was, but we couldn't do business for a day. Make the most of that, right? Hey, this thing broke. By the way, there's 5 other services we've identified that are in the exact same state and could all blow up tomorrow, and we'd be on the same call. And so that's your entrance point to getting everyone to have attention on the thing. And it's unfortunate that, things have to fail first sometimes, but that's how it goes when you're, especially at a startup where you kind of have conflicting priorities.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think that's a really good point there, is like outages happen. So let's just make the most out of that learning experience.
Absolutely.
That's been a cultural change for us as an industry over the last, I don't know, I'd say 10 to 15 years.
I feel like Etsy published that the famous blameless postmortems post. It feels like that's ages ago now, but it's still so relevant every day.
Yeah.
So yeah, things broke. Who cares how they broke? Let's just have it not break in the same way again. And if you can do that, that to me is like the health of an SRE team, right? It's not. Yeah, I really hate places that measure health by, oh, there were 4 outages last quarter. Okay. Like, were they repeat root causes? Yes. Okay, maybe there's a real problem. But if they weren't repeat root causes and you're solving root causes and writing good postmortems, outages are great.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one of the things that it's really hard to convince people of is outages aren't as bad as you think, because where most of us work, like, we can recover. And I say that coming from a background where sometimes when we had outages, people's lives were at stake.
Yeah.
And so if you can walk out of an outage and say, no one died, like, we're going to be all right.
Yeah. Well, plus it ties into SLIs, SLOs, error budgets, right? People, a lot of times before the SLO, concept became very popular, like, is 5 minutes of downtime bad? What does that mean? You have this error budget and you can go, well, we're a 3.9 service, what we committed to, we have 44.5 minutes a month. Okay, 5 minutes isn't great, but it's fine. Like, we can, but if you have, hey, I've gone past it and we're writing checks or, giving SLA credits, like, okay, now, we have this quantifiable, not how people feel number to talk about things. And
yeah. So for internal apps, do you take them that far where you give them, assign them SLIs and SLOs and SLAs for performance?
I've been starting to. So this is actually my first gig out of many where I've really kind of focused on internal stuff. I've often been the problem of, the person focusing on prod and, on a different team. That now my team is kind of, wearing all the hats thing here. And yeah, so we're putting SLOs on internal services and internal workflows and trying to treat them with the same. We have that in production, of course, and we're trying to give it the same level of, thought and execution.
I've seen a huge shift in the industry overall, like where some teams, maybe they're called platform teams, have sort of been excluded from thinking about what a product is or how they do product management or even product ownership. And I feel like that's really been turning around first with the DevOps movement. And now just I'll look at how we build services, microservices all together, and no one's sort of excluded or have a different process. Internal teams, doesn't matter. You're still offering a real service to someone, just happens to be your customers or within the same customer or same organization.
That's exactly how I sell it. Is you still have customers. They just happen to be coworkers.
Right.
You can still do the same stuff. You can build user journeys. You can figure out what does a customer expect? What makes a customer angry? It's a lot easier to figure it out because you can ask them in Slack instead of guessing like, man, what are my customers? What's the threshold at which my customer complains? You can just straight up ask them when they work for you. At the same
I don't think they necessarily have good, nice answers though. Like your customers.
You find there's a variety of personalities, right? Some people, the moment a Jenkins job doesn't passes in 4 minutes, they're like, Jenkins is crap. This is terrible. But at least you can get it. That's how customers are in general, right? So you get the whole gamut of emotions, but you can tell when there's an outage, how loud people are internally. People will tend to be louder internally than your customer.
I mean, that's what I mean. Like, it could definitely, it's still a problem in some regard, but how do you temper the difference of perspective? Like, I feel like users on the outside are more quiet in a lot of ways. Like, it's difficult to pull information out of them. And internally, as you mentioned, it's like everyone's screaming as soon as something goes even a little bit.
Well, I think that if you can show them that there are graphs, right? Like, there should always be a graph, generically. I work for a guy that always said, where's the graph? Where's the graph? And it was annoying at first, but you're like, okay, maybe there should always be a graph. So people know that people are actually watching Jenkins. People are actually, rather computers are watching Jenkins, not people, right? And if you show hey, we had this outage, and yes, it was a really terrible day and no one shipped any code, but here's this great postmortem everyone can read. And it's got a reasonable trigger and root cause and follow-ups and timeline, and we're actually closing the follow-ups. It's very visible. And I feel it should be the same way with customer outages. Very visible, right? There shouldn't be anything to hide.
Yeah. So one idea I've been working on, because I work a lot with startups, and the whole thing about a startup is odds are the product that you launch is not going to be the product that you're successful with. And you're going to try a lot of different things before you become successful as a company. So how do we measure that so we don't spend any more time than is absolutely necessary working on the wrong problem? And so I've been working on this idea of success criteria. What does it take to make this application successful? And a lot of my background is in the infrastructure for mobile apps. And for mobile apps, you can measure it as, we need 10,000 monthly active users spending 45 minutes per week in the app. Or something like that.
Measuring engagement. Yeah.
Yeah. So because then if you tie in our total cost of acquisition to get a new user is X amount of dollars, and our cost of infrastructure is X amount of dollars per user. You can do some pretty simple math there to find out how many users you need for this to be a profitable product. And so trying to figure that out and get that in the early stages of an application, so we know when to either double down on this application or shelve it as soon as possible. I'm wondering if that same thing applies to internal tools, and how do you define what that looks like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I have a good, where we deployed a code analysis tool, and it's a good. I don't know how to quantify it for stuff like that, but again, we have some of the very active developers that'll give feedback of hey, this thing gave me a bad analysis, and we tweak it and make it better. It's okay, that means they're actually looking at it and making code health better. And I don't know. I think I think you're on the right track with having a number like MAUs and that kind of thing. It's tough internally.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because I think there's
messages.
I think there's two classes of internal products, right? There's internal products that people are very opinionated on. Code analysis is one, right? I think this gives me bad code analysis. I don't like that. But CI, right? I think largely people don't actually care what CI product you're running. They care, do my PRs get approvals fast? Is master green? Do deployments happen at the pace that we think they should at our company? And if that works, who cares what the product is, right? They're like, and so for stuff like that, you can just be super results oriented, right? Like, hey, these are the SLIs. These are our SLOs we're trying to go for. We're making them. We're not making them. Like we're a Jenkins shop now, and we're considering alternatives. And you ask people what we should run. There's a million things, but no one actually cares what we run.
Right.
If they can declare their jobs in some declarative way that's not too terrible and it works, everyone's happy.
Yeah. I'll tell you what'll make them care. If they have to be the ones to convert your Jenkins jobs to the new platform, then a lot of people will be like, Jenkins is probably okay.
There's a lot of GitHub Actions talk because a lot of people have done stuff there. So, I mean, part of that that's the political, or the human side of it is, hey, maybe it's, if all of the products can do the thing, maybe we pick the one people have the most experience with just to make life easier in the transition. That's a good point.
I mean, Will, you asked the scary question, which is, how do we know our thing is going to be successful at a startup level? And if we take the perceived public metrics on 90% fail, what do companies do with teams that are part of that 90%? Do they let them go? Do they reposition them? I think that's a huge struggle. And it's scary to know that there are some metrics associated with your success, even within a larger company, that you don't have job security in.
Yeah, I can tell you just in my experience with startups, that's like when you identify the success fail criteria answers that question, because if you can identify it early, then you take those people and you put them on what your next idea is. But in many cases, if you wait too late to identify that this product is not going to be successful, you've already been bleeding too much cash for too long that you've got to salvage what's left. And the first thing that goes when you're trying to cut costs is your staff.
I wonder if there's a lesson to be learned that can be pulled to internal apps, though. In the startup market, there's this idea of letters of intent, right? Getting signatures from potential customers even before you built anything based off of that idea. And maybe there's a idea here of how to transition this to even internal teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I like the idea of formalizing it. I mean, I think what I often do for these kind of things is, like, you find hey, you might have 10 teams and 6 teams really care about this thing you're building because they're big users of it. You find like a champion on each team that is, opinionated and is willing to talk to you about what's good and bad. And maybe not a letter of intent, but you write a design doc and then you make sure that they've read it and give you feedback, not just a check. But, if anyone reads a design doc and has no comments, they didn't actually read it.
Fair point.
That's my feeling. Like, I've never met an engineer without an opinion on a design. So, so you get feedback from people on these teams, and it's maybe not as formal as a letter of intent, but you kind of have social buy-in, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that was one of the things that whenever I worked at Aptive, I started with them super early, and we just accidentally got this right, but we built this platform for all the engineers to build and deploy their software. And the way we built it, we had such great collaboration between the infrastructure team and the engineering team that anytime the engineering team wanted to expand the capabilities of that platform tool, most of the time their request came in the form of a pull request to just add that feature to it.
Yeah.
And I've never been able to duplicate that since then, but that had such a significant impact on how I think about platforms that's my goal every day.
Yeah, I like that. It's kind of the open source approach, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of that is the buy-in, right? Because if you're using a platform or a language that no one else wants or knows or likes, they're not going to learn Rust to send you a pull review to fix a thing they don't like. But if it's already in Go and the rest of your code's in Go, it might just show up one morning.
Maybe there's a corollary here as well to the total economy in the startup world, where your customers are somewhere along the spectrum of innovators, early adopters, early minority, all the way to laggards. And it's really, who are you talking to? What does the rest of your organization look like? Because I feel like, you would need innovators and early adopters there who not only need that functionality, but have a huge stake or care about how it's implemented, and not just people who think it's table stakes or just belongs there or have opinions that they just want it done their way.
Yeah. True. Yeah. And that's, I think you hit it right on the head there, that early stage startups require that innovation mindset.
For sure. They're not going to get very far if only a few people are thinking about how to push whatever their product is forward.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
And I want to clarify that there, there's a certain type of person who just wants to show up for work and do their assigned job. And they want to do that for 20 or 30 years till they retire. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Just that an early stage startup is not the right environment for you to be successful.
Yeah. You definitely see that. You can find at the bigger companies, you have these classes of employees, right? There are some people that you can tell either came from startups or are going to go to startups afterwards. Right. And then, like you said, there are some people that just, close tickets and do the work. And that's, completely fine. And I sometimes wish that I could be that person. It would be a lot less stressful.
Right.
And I don't know, maybe I will be in 5 or 10. Who knows, right? People change, but.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the types of internal platforms, because we've talked about, like CI/CD. What other tools are out there that we should be looking for as internal tools? One that pops up immediately in my mind, only because I've been bitten by this one at every single company I've ever worked at for the last 3 decades, is the internal data analytics team. Like, those guys have monster infrastructures and are just doing what it takes to generate the reports that the business wants to see. And whenever you get a hold of it, you're like, oh, wow, I'm not even really certain how this thing is working. So what other internal tools are out there?
Well, some people run their own VCS, GitHub, GitLab, on-prem. We run Garrett. So that's its own, care and feeding and SLOs. I think one thing people actually miss is the monitoring infrastructure themselves. If you run Prometheus and Elastic, or if you don't have a vendor, right? And even if you have a vendor, you have some component that is shipping metrics to them. Right. You have to monitor that. If that stuff all breaks, you're flying blind and you need to know it. I think that often goes neglected. Right. I worked somewhere where someone came to us once and they were like, they were on a really noisy on-call rotation, which is its own problem. And they knew things were broken because I haven't gotten a pager duty in 90 minutes. Like, that was their escalation. And I was like, well, it's actually broken. And this is so sad that this is how we found out about the problem on many levels, right? 1, we didn't know. 2, you expect to be paged at least once every 90 minutes. Like, but it's true. Like, I think the, monitoring infrastructure, it seems like it should be obvious, but it's not necessarily obvious. That.
Do you think that's a miss from like existing observability tools, that they aren't able to have internal metrics on what the expectation is on getting logs? Like, I feel like we've used CloudWatch for a while, and one of the things it does in AWS is you can alert on missing data.
Well, that's in Prometheus, it's very hard to alert on missing data. Right? You end up alerting on like the uptime series being 0. Right. But then what if you have a problem that generates your targets and there is no uptime series, right? Like, there are a lot of these different things. Yeah, I think that it's not, I don't think it's first class of, watch the watchers. I think the data is there though, and you have to kind of do it. I worked somewhere where we had a relatively large Prometheus and Grafana infrastructure for metrics and a really large Splunk infrastructure for logs. And both of them had their problems, and they're run by 2 different teams. And we got together and said, hey, let's make a deal, right? We'll write a prober for Splunk and have it export metrics and monitor Splunk and Prometheus. You write a prober for Prometheus and have it write logs and monitor in Splunk. And that's not perfect, but you make with what you've got. And that was a company where it was a large place that was going to be hard to bring in a third-party tool to help us. And, but we made do with it, and it was super successful. We found lots of problems with, if they both died at the same time, okay, that's the end of the world. But the world is probably already ending if they both died. So,
do you think there are third-party vendors that actually solve this in a reasonable way?
Well, I think it's hard to say, right? It depends what you're looking. If you're using a third-party vendor for monitoring, you need to look at your metrics of shipping, like, is your data there with them, right? So
Right.
you have to set something up in their system to do it. But then, do you want to back up? Do you want to know if they're up? You may have to run a little side monitoring infrastructure to watch them, because it may not be anything you can do about it, but you may want to at least be aware that, hey, the thing that normally sends me alerts is not going to send me alerts. Maybe we should all be, go back to the knock days and stare at some things for a couple hours.
I mean, that's exactly what I don't want to have to think about. Like, I don't want to have to think about my vendor being down in some way that requires me to monitor them. Like, I feel like, if I'm paying money out for that, I should be getting that by default. I don't know. Maybe I
think it's just my pessimistic SRE brain.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Everything will break. Everything will break. So whether you're building it or not, it's going to break. And you either want to know about it or if you think something doesn't break, you're just not measuring it. That's kind of my
yeah.
Sure. I have two examples where I think that's a lot of effort has gone into that. CoreLogix is a logging and monitoring platform, and they have anomaly detection. And so if you have a service that normally spits out, 1,000 log entries per hour, if it stops, it identifies that as an anomaly and will trigger that and say, hey, nothing is like technically alerted, but something's changed here. And then another one that we just recently started using is a tool for monitoring our infrastructure spend called Cloud Zero. And it has a really cool anomaly detection as well. It says, hey, this project, their current spend rate has been this, but today it changed to this, which is, not necessarily a problem, but cool that it acknowledges that. And you're like, yeah, why did that change?
I think the correlation analysis like that is really good for not necessarily paging someone at 2 a.m., but reports and debugging. Like, hey, if a problem started 2 days ago, what else changed 2 days ago? Right? Hey, you also started spending less money on this. It's like, correlation doesn't mean causation, but I'm certainly going to look there first now.
I think people underestimate that, really, though. Like, just looking at when does the problem start, what else happened there? And I feel like it's so obvious to say that, but it's usually one of the first things that's missed.
Yeah, for sure. It's been like a pet project of mine for a very long time. I have a super stale, busted repo trying to do this back when, remember CEP, continuous event processing? It was all the hype, and like, maybe it wasn't all the hype, but it was somewhat popular in the late 2000s. I was trying to do the Holt Winters forecasting, like the thing that's built into, RRD tool added that thing, again, ages ago, dating myself, that you could, put the prediction line in front of your graph. And I always thought, like, yeah, let's just do that. Like, let's predict every time series. Like, it may not be great signal, and I'm not going to look at it unless something's broken. But hey, I've got 20,000 metrics. I'm not going to look at all of them, right? So when the site starts getting slow, it'd be really interesting if I could also see, hey, IO wait time on the database server went up. It's like, okay, are we sending queries? Did a disk go bad? Oh, hey, look, errors on this disk spindle started going up too. Like, maybe there's something here. And I think it solves another monitoring problem that people still make is people monitor root causes and not what they actually want out of a system, right? Like, sending me an alert that my CPU is high at 2 a.m. Like, cool, we're using the CPU we paid for. Like, thumbs up, back to bed, right? Awesome capacity planning. But if it's making the site slow, page me and say the site is slow, right? Don't page me and say Java's doing GC pauses. Well, yeah, you're running Java. That's what it does all day. If they're too long, you're going to fail a latency monitor, and page me on the thing that matters. So, like, I want these root causes to be the correlation engine to kind of help me figure out, okay, well, 80,000 things could go wrong. And if you put an alert on all of those, you're back at that team that notices you don't get paged for 90 minutes, right?
You hit
and if you look at every team that has page fatigue, this is exactly the problem.
Yeah, for
most people don't even know why they get paged for 90% of the things. This organically grown over the life of the team. Hey, this one time, the database backups did this thing terribly, and now we page on it. And then you have so many of those. It's like, well, there's 8,000 alerts, and most of them resolve themselves, and we just shrug our shoulders and move on.
I don't think it starts from a good place. Like, I think there's this idea that just having dashboards is valuable in itself, and it sort of propagates from there. It's like, oh, what are all the metrics we could be collecting, and let's show stuff. And sometimes there is an organization that thinks that there is some inherent value, like, oh, this is how many requests we're getting. Let's use it to get more headcount because we have to support such complex things. Or I remember a previous company that thought it was really cool to have a geolocation dashboard of where things were happening all over the world related to their thing. And I'm like, you know what? I didn't need to drive that with real data. I could have just randomly pinged a spot on the world on a flat, two-dimensional map and be like, look, it's happening. I didn't need to
little lights coming up all over the world.
For sure. Yeah. And it's just so totally unnecessary. And so I've been on this maybe personal vendetta here to make them be actionable. So, what is the business impact? But more than that, what will you do with that information? Is the site being slow? Will you actually take an action here to make it faster? Or is there like a run book or something that we can go and actually execute on?
Well, that's another interesting part of it all, is like the term run book has been so ruined by so many places. Like if your run book is log into this server and run this script, like, it's just, you're
why is it not automated?
Right? And like, so I think our run book should be, these are the places you should look. Like if it's ever a thing we know that breaks, fix it. Like, I talked to someone once that was saying they were very proud. I mean, I felt bad, right? We built this great thing, and like we had this service that crashes all the time, and we built this great thing that automatically restarts it. I was like, okay, like, how about collecting stack traces and sending it to developers and fixing the reason the service crashes all day? Like, yes, you should restart the service when it crashes, no argument. But like, that is not the end of your journey. That is the first 10% of your journey, right?
I love that because it actually happened at one of the previous companies I was in. The name of the service was the Service Monitor, and it did actually do this. The root cause, though, and maybe you've got some infinite wisdom here, is they were using a library for math operations that had a memory leak in it. And so this would have required actually contacting a third-party company to get their open source software actually fixed, which I think was under proprietary use license. So sometimes you have to do some ridiculous things.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you're in a world where you have to use a vendor library you can't fix, you may just have to, live with the workarounds and acknowledge the terror. Yeah.
No, for sure. The problem is when you start expending that to every problem that looks similar rather than it knowing that it's the right answer.
Right. The nightly Jenkins restart. Yeah. Well,
speaking of Jenkins, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, a lot of some bank places I've worked were like, hey, we should just, we're 24 by 5.5, right? The Japan and US markets, and they're closed, Friday night. Let's just reboot everything every Saturday. I'm like, why? They're like, well, why not? And I was like, I think I asked the question first. Like, we should reboot things when we upgrade the kernel, and we should use that time to apply upgrades. But just doing a bunch of stuff every Saturday because we can, because there's no services, it's like, feels like we're just making busy work and finding things to break on a Saturday and ruin our weekends.
Yeah, but there's also really hard arguments to argue against, even though they're somehow fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, well, we didn't do it.
Congrats.
Yeah, someone, there was a change set out to put a reboot in a cron job, and I was like, that is just, no, that's something is going to be terrible there, and I don't want to be
that's
part of it.
How to ruin a weekend 101.
Yeah, totally. And it was already like that because I don't know. I think 24/7 is a way better environment to have fundamentally good operations than 24/5. There's just too many bad habits in 24/5. Oh, we can always restart this by turning off the database and turning off the clients and running an alter. So eventually you're going to have to run an alter midweek during trading. Like, you're not going to like it, but it's going to happen. And you're going to have to take an outage to do it because you haven't figured out how to do it.
I mean, there's two obvious failure modes from that, which are, well, what happens if something changes on the restart, like, a new upgrade or something, right? Now you're triggering that at an unpredictable time, or just straight database replication crashing and losing out on what was in the journal at that moment. Like, that's not a thing you want to actually have happen.
Yeah. Do it in your lab to figure out how to deal with it, but maybe not prod. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've mentioned Jenkins and Garrett, and so I feel like I'm picking up on a trend here that you're running a lot of services in-house, whereas other companies may choose to use SaaS providers for those. Do you have a particular opinion on that?
Well, I mean, I feel like my whole career, I've been at all angles of the build versus buy debate.
Right.
It was
Yeah.
funny. Some of the banks I've worked at, well, really any of the big orgs, you see like the historical CIOs, CTOs, whoever they are at the org, one will get hired and we have to build everything. Then you can, and you have 10 years of this, right? And then you look back and you have all these disparate things of like, oh, this must have been built during the build era of 2009. I mean, I think the answer is really, it depends on the staff and what their expertise is. And should you run Jenkins in-house? Well, can you run Jenkins in-house? Right? Like, are you going to dedicate the resources to do it right? But just outsourcing something isn't always as easy as just paying somebody, right?
Sure.
Like we mentioned before, it's porting stuff there. It's operationalizing it and actually like taking advantage of a SaaS service to provide value is sometimes just as hard. The challenge isn't running the infrastructure, it's using the infrastructure effectively, right? Having Jenkins doesn't help. Having jobs that do meaningful things are important. And you have that problem in any CI infrastructure. So I think some of the things that doesn't matter, observability, right? It's really hard to run high availability observability. It's also a mouthful to say. So I mean, like, I'm a fan of I work for an observability company, but I mean, I'm a fan of outsourcing some of that stuff. I think there's a certain scale where you run it internally. I think very few people are at that scale.
Yeah.
Very few people are actually running four nines proper, like that's, I don't know if it's a triple digit number, but it's a small amount of companies that actually, a lot of people think they're doing it, but not a lot of people actually do it, right?
It's interesting. I mean, we're 5 nines on our core competency service, which is like identity
Insane.
and auth stuff. But
that's huge.
We're not running the monitoring observability stuff ourselves. Like we've found we're using our cloud provider, or actually we're still in the process of trying to find a vendor that actually works for us. And I think that's going to fuel my next question. I'm curious whether or not you see companies get the build versus buy decision right. I know that they put a lot of effort into comparing vendors, but then I feel like it's sort of, there's this gap on actually being able to correctly identify what the total cost of ownership is if they do actually go and build or run something themselves.
That is a tough one, right? Like TCO is so hard because it's easy to do this is my AWS bill, this is the vendor bill. How do you quantify the outages and the people and the stress and the upgrades? And I haven't seen a good answer for that. I mean, of course, any vendor will try to do that for you because they, of course, want to help.
Yeah.
Good. But that one is tough. I mean, but seeing it done right, I think the most common mistake people make when they're doing the evaluation is writing a requirement stock is surprisingly hard.
Yeah.
Like write me a requirement stock for CI and don't use a single product name, right? Right? People say like my requirement is an Envoy proxy. It's like there's absolutely no way. If your requirement is an Envoy proxy, what have you done, right? If your requirement is a thing that speaks XDS, maybe Envoy is the only answer. But write down the thing you want, the outcome you want. This is the same root cause versus SLO thing. Like it's the XY problem as well. I don't know if you guys have heard. Yeah, people say I want to do this thing. It's like, what are you really trying to accomplish? And then let's figure out. This is what we could build and accomplish that. This is what we could buy and accomplish that, or not accomplish that. And maybe the decision gets more obvious. But it's just so hard to frame it in terms of completely agnostic to the tool, the thing you want to do.
You get to be the bad guy. You have to say, well, you were going to do an easy job, which is just pick a tool. And now you're forcing them to go back to the drawing board and be like, but why?
Right.
Really look
philosophical, right? Why do you want your builds to succeed? Yeah,
right, exactly.
But it's a good question. Like in the CI case, like why do you want your builds to succeed? Because I want to merge code faster and ship code to production faster. Okay, so your metric is time from commit to development, time from commit to production. Okay, we came up with really great metrics from asking hard. I think it seems kind of like, I don't know, weird at first and contrived, but I think it actually leads to like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
No, I'm totally with you.
Yeah.
It makes me think of there's like some Freudian stuff here where I just want to sit here with a pipe and go, but why do you want your build to succeed?
Well, it's, the 5 whys of a postmortem.
Is it because of unresolved issues with your mother that you feel your build needs to succeed?
Right.
I mean, when you pull individuals into an organization, their personal values do impact what that organization drives as importance. And sometimes I've known software engineers to be quite illogical and driven by their emotional state to, it has to be like this. It's so much better. And, you joke, but there is something there.
No, that's definitely, I'm probably guilty of that.
I think we all are.
Yeah.
No, never admit that.
Never happened to me.
So you work for an observability company and you're observing your internal tools. Do you use your own product for that?
We do. Yeah. We try to dog food all the time. And so we measure SLOs internally. One cool thing we've done is we have a bunch of, it's not great, like, some shell script stuff that maybe shouldn't be shell scripts, but everyone's got, a pile of that somewhere. But it's pretty important in the normal workflow. And it was having a lot of problems. And, we just found a better way to measure, like, what is the success of people that say, I want to run a local cluster? How often does that fail? Turns out it was failing a lot, more than we thought. And then debugging gets really hard because you're like, okay, well, could you go put a set-x in this file and run it again in mail? And no one wants to do that, right? People just want to, like, hey, my thing broke. Like, why can't you just fix it, right? So we built all of this in, even to our shell, right? So like we have like a tracing view, like think of microservice tracing. Like there's a request ID and it hits 20 services. Like you run this one shell script, it actually is running like 93 shell scripts underneath it, for better or worse, but it's happening. And we have like a trace graph of you ran this, and like so then people come and say, man, it took 9 minutes to start this thing and it normally takes 6 minutes. Like, this sucks. Why is this so? We can go in, look up their username, find the 9-minute run, click it, look at the trace and go, oh yeah, there was this bug pulling from ECR or whatever it is, right? And just doing that helped us pin down. It turns out all these problems with the tool were like systemic to one or two things being wrong, poor assumptions being made, and we fixed those and we're kind of off to the races on it. And now we're building a prober for it. So we'll have like a graph, again, everything has a graph, right? So the same way we have an SLO for ingesting an observation in a certain amount of time, we'll have an SLO for, hey, this thing can create a dev environment locally and it happens in less than this amount of time. And then we'll have variants of it. Like, does it work for people that run it over and over again on their box? What about a new engineer that logs into a fresh box and runs it? Because that's always a different, there's some, that's where always the goblins live in these things of, well, my Terraform works fine. Oh man, I destroyed it, have to run it from scratch. Does that work? So kind of trying to measure all those different things from that using our tool.
Is there like a eBPF integration here that you plan on utilizing in the future to understand what the requests are or how the script is running fundamentally on the machine?
Yeah, I think we're looking at that, and I haven't dealt with it too much myself, but I think that is kind of the ultimate for this. I would like to marry the two, right? Yeah. eBPF or the raw, like just show me everything that's running and help me, and then my injected data. So yeah, I think that is in the future.
For your internal tools, like once you identify them, you're like, okay, we need to bring this up to being like a part of we need to treat it like it's part of our core infrastructure. How do you socialize that across engineering so that everyone knows that this is a supported tool, this is a preferred path? If you were thinking about going and building something on your own for this one use case, we already have you covered here. How do you communicate that?
Email to the all list for sure.
Pin your Slack message. What could go wrong?
Right? Channel, baby.
You can write documentation all day, but like I think we all know how much our documentation gets read.
Right.
I think the way to do it is to this, goes on the layer 8 problem we were talking about earlier, but like you have to build a good relationship with all these teams and have them come to you sooner in the process. Like the sooner infrastructure and SRE folks can be involved in anything, like before code is written, would be super ideal. So they don't come to you and say, hey, I wrote this really cool thing, but it uses MongoDB. It's like, we don't do that here, right? Like, maybe there's a great reason it does that, but it's much harder once they've written code, right? Like, it's the poker pot committed thing. It's like, well, I called for the flush draw on the flop. I'm putting all my money in on the turn no matter what. It's like, let's do the math. Not great. Get to them, pre-flop, right? Like, should you even be in this pot with MongoDB, right? Maybe
That's
not.
a good call.
Yeah. But that's not easy to do, right? You have to, there's not a technical answer there. That's just build relationships, make your team available, make people, have interactions people like.
Yeah, no, I think it goes back to the sort of product management thing earlier that we were talking about, where if you are at the point where you need to tell people about the thing that you're working on, like maybe you didn't approach the situation necessarily in the best way, rather than driving it from how you would a startup, which is, okay, what do our customers' pain points look like? And, as users, what do they want? And they're coming to us and saying, hey, when are you done with this thing that we asked for? And the implementation details are, of course, what you're picking because you know that best. But fundamentally, it's just a matter of pinging them on whatever RSS feed that they're looking at.
Yeah. I worked at a large company before when we had an infrastructure PM, and it was amazing. It was just it felt like it was easy mode, right? Like someone else is going to go gather requirements. I don't have to. Okay, yeah, I'll go do some work. That's fine. And then they show up, prioritized in a list. It's like, well, this is awesome. This is what it's like on the other side, right?
You just need to plug that into ChatGPT and get the answer out as well. And then you can just, stop doing all the work altogether.
What do my engineers want?
That's interesting. Get a Slack bot that uses ChatGPT to act as a PM role.
I was going to say the other way around. Have the PMs just answer the question of what they want to have built, and then it will automatically build it for them.
Right. This is what the hive mind internet wants to build. Probably not so bad if everyone wants it.
I don't think you'll get to 5 nines. I think it's more like 5 twos reliability.
The nines won't be in the front, but they'll be in there somewhere.
If you carry it out to enough decimal places, there's some nines.
Yeah. You need a non-repeating integer, and statistically you're good.
Cool. So what else should we be thinking about for internal tools? What's your big takeaway piece of advice?
Apply all the same rigor. Like, when prod breaks, you go and declare an incident using your incident management tool. You have a communications role. You have the whole thing, right? You got the run book. Hopefully, if you don't, you should. And then when you're done, you write a postmortem. You might even publish to customers. Publish it internally, right? Like, why shouldn't an engineer be able to read about why Jenkins broke? If production breaks, you're going to file a bunch of follow-ups. You're going to prioritize it over other work because we don't want prod to break again. Same thing for internal tools. Like, it's really, I think that's the big takeaway is there's really not much of a difference. And people, well, if prod is down, our customers that pay us can't do work. Okay, great. If CI is down, how are you going to ship a fix when prod is down?
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're like, oh, I wrote this really great infrastructure where changes can only go through CI and not handmade. That's a great thing. But if your CI isn't as available as production, 3 nines CI, 4 nines production, you can only make changes through CI. Not a math major, but we're going to have a problem here. 40 minutes out of the year, it's going to be an issue. So I think that I think people just underestimate how important that stuff really is and the impact it can have. You don't have to wait till it, the worst case is production's having a problem. Your monitoring is broken and you can't see it. Your CI is broken and you can't ship a fix for it, whether that fix is config or code. And then that's a really terrible postmortem to have to send out to a customer of, well, we knew what was wrong, but we had a fix. We couldn't build the Docker image that had the fix because, our 2004 era Jenkins decided to crash and not start again. Yeah, that's not a good look for anybody.
You identified it. If there's value in doing this activity for some of your services because of what the users look like, then there's probably value in doing it for other services that just happen to be internal.
I think that's a big part of postmortems, right? Like, if you find a production problem where, oh, hey, we had this bug in our database connection pool and we had this reconnection issue and this thing happened, where else do you have connection pools? Right? That should be the logical question you ask. Same thing internally, right? We had this neglected service. Where else? What else is flying under the radar that's going to bite us. And those are the tough, some of the postmortem action items are like, fix this bug with a reproduce case. Okay, that's like a day of work, right? It's, when you're done because the test passes, it's easy. These are much more ominous, like project-y follow-ups. But if you don't do them, you're going to pay the price.
Is there like some obvious pitfall that a lot of companies, or maybe even everyone, seems to get wrong in this area, sort of besides the stuff we've been talking about?
Well, in postmortems, people are extraordinarily bad at distinguishing between root causes and triggers, right? Pete typed this command and took the site down, right? Root cause is not Pete sucks, right? That's a trigger, right? Like the root cause is, why was there a command to type? Where are the seatbelts? Where are the gates? Where is the code review? Where's all that stuff, right? You have to really, I think the 5 whys thing is interesting. I don't think you actually have to write down why 5 times in a document and fill it out. I think that's a little bit, demeaning and not great. But the philosophy of like really come to the root cause of the problem, right? Like root causes aren't, well, AWS had an availability zone die. Like, what can we do? You can run in more than one availability zone. You can do this, you can do that, right? Like, and maybe you choose not to at this point, but you should at least identify it and say, okay, like we know the root cause and we've chosen that this is a risk and this is why we're a 3.9 service or a 4.9 service. And maybe someday we'll make it better, maybe we won't, but at least being honest with yourself about it.
That's huge right there. I want to highlight that because like just because you identify the root cause doesn't mean you have to do anything about it, because I've seen multiple instances where companies build infrastructure that is far beyond their budget and their actual requirements because they're focused on that. And the analogy I like to use is like whenever I go to work every day, the fastest, most efficient way for me to get there is buying my own jet copter. But my budget really says I should stick with my 87 Toyota Corolla, and so you got to like balance those two things, right?
Right. Maybe the fix is leave 10 minutes earlier instead of buying the jet copter.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I think also it comes back to SLOs of like, okay, we had this big problem, but was it a big problem? Like it's hard, back to the emotion thing, right? Like if a big customer was impacted, it gets a lot more priority, but you have to quantify at the end of the day, like, hey, this is how many 9s we have. This is our error budget. We used it during this incident. Maybe that's not good, but this is par for the course. And we don't need to suddenly become multi-cloud, multi-region, all the things, load balancing, complexity, because that's the other thing is looking at, you can add 9s with complexity, but complexity can also reduce 9s. And you have to be careful over engineering in response to things. And I hate to use the term like, there's always the SLA term. Well, if there's an act of God, then, this managed service goes away. It's like, well, what's an act of God? Is that an AZ going down? I don't know. That's just expected, right? Right. Is it a tornado hit the Virginia area and all of US East 1 went away? Okay, there's an act of God we don't have to plan for. But if you're trying to be a 5.9 service, you're not running in one region anyway. So, it kind of all has to make sense together. The whole story has to just kind of flow. And that's where I think some people get off. They write an SLO, but they don't have a story to back it. Or they write a really complex story where they don't need for an SLO that's simpler.
Yeah. Fair point.
For sure.
But it's an art. So it's, there's no right or wrong answer. I always say SLO, everything is so technical and SLOs are this like wafty, what is right, what is wrong, who really knows? You just kind of have to do it. We were rolling out SLOs at a company. They're like, how do I know my SLO's right? I was like, well, it's not because it's your first SLO. So you build it and you have postmortems and you adjust it as you go. Were you at, did you have an outage? Yes. Did your SLO show it? No. Cool. Make it more aggressive. Did you not have an outage and your SLO said you had an outage? Make it less aggressive, right? Like it sounds simple, but that's just the feedback loop. And if you're doing it 12 months later, you'll probably have a pretty decent setup and have a much better idea of what your customers consider an outage or not.
I mean, you hit on something really interesting there, actually. So if the SLA is your, contracted amount, and the I is whatever your indicator is, the O is just an objective. So it does seem like it must be subjective in every way. How do you sort of pick that? How do you know what that should be?
First off, if you have an A, the O must be more aggressive.
Let's hope, right?
Right. But let's assume for a moment you don't have a contractual, I say SLAs are like SLOs with lawyers, right? It's really kind of the same thing. You have to guess. I think that's the unfortunate of it. And that's where, hire somebody with experience. They'll be able to guess more accurately, maybe, but they'll at least also know when they're wrong. So I don't know. It's a process where you just have to iterate. And sometimes you have a major miss. You're like, oh man, we really thought we were measuring this service. And we had this massive outage in our dashboard. It was like, everything's green, nothing's wrong, and users are in terror. It's like, okay, well, we missed this super critical part of the picture. And then you do the postmortem thing and you figure out, okay, well, I made this common mistake. What other of my SLOs have this common, that I make this mistake more than once?
Would it be fair to say that it should be meaningful, so that if you're violating it, then you're taking some action as a result. And if you're not, then you don't do anything. So maybe it's about finding that sweet spot where it causes the right things to happen in your organization.
Absolutely. I think that, to get there, right, you need to have some kind of alerting and reporting around it. And I think alerting on SLOs is like a very hard problem. Like the Google book will talk about burn rate alerting. Like, have fun implementing that, right? That's very hard. But if you can get there or have some approximation of it and report on it, like, I'm a big fan of getting, it doesn't work right away, but eventually maturing to a point where every alert has a ticket, right? And the ticket is either fix the thing that caused the alert, this needs to be more resilient, this needs more replicas, or this alert paged me, nothing was actually wrong, we should fix the alert. And if you do that over time, like, that's how you can get SLOs to cause change. And when they really are broken, the postmortem loop is the real fix. Like, the trick with SLOs is you kind of, I don't know, there's that perpetual battle with infrastructure and product, right? You're like, hey, we need you guys to write more stable code, and product is like, we need features, this needs to be a different color, right? Which is fine. Like, there's a balance there. But if you get everyone to agree on SLOs and you're really user focused, like, hey, users are happy when the latency, P99 latency is this, and users are sad when it's over that. And everyone, like business, engineering, management agrees on that. Your argument is a lot easier when you have an outage to say, our users weren't happy. Like, objectively, our users weren't happy. So we either fix the thing or we decide that our threshold was incorrect on what is a happy user. But one of the two we can't do nothing. Or we can't just write features and say, well, users might be unhappy again because we know this thing will blow up. And I find that is a good, you almost trick product into it. They're like, oh yeah, SLOs, these are great. And then later it's like, oh yeah, I guess we have to fix this now. So, we'll give you a sprint or, whatever it is.
I did the same trick a long time ago with OKRs. Very similar thing where, once they agree to the OKRs, you try to set the mindset of what does this actually mean? Why are we setting it? And you set it's so we can know what to do when we know what to do the right thing. And then later you can just point back to it and be like, hey, we decided what the right thing was going to be in this situation. Now it's time to execute on it. Or, you have to make a trade-off, as you said.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough, you can't solve people problems with tech, but you can try. That'll be the billion dollar, thing. But I don't know. I feel like data is always helpful. Emotions are bad. Everyone has emotional arguments, but data is hard to, people still argue with data. But I feel like if you're on the side of data, you at least have a fighting chance of pushing for change. Or
how do you ever feel like you're in the situation where you get scared of survivorship bias, where you even if you're doing root cause analysis and you're finding really what the underlying problem is, that even though you're going out and fixing it, that you're missing some other side of the iceberg that is waiting out there to come and crush you?
Totally. But I think that, I don't know, I just accepted it, right? It's the pessimistic SRE brain. Like, everything will break. everything I fix will also break. When I leave a company, everybody will blame me when it breaks, and that's whatever. Like I've internalized it and accepted it, and it used to stress me out a lot more, and now it's just like, yep, this thing I'm rolling out might break, and at least that if it breaks, you're going to write a good postmortem and learn from it, and that's kind of the consolation prize of like, yeah, it sucks to write a big postmortem after a big outage, but also, that's the gig. And
like, we shouldn't have hired Pete. That's the RCA result, right?
Well, like the first place I ever went, FedEx, right? There was this meeting every week, the R squared meeting, the redundancy and reliability meeting.
Interesting.
And it was like, how good of a week is the VP having, right? And there was always this rumor that like, oh, somebody was fired once at this meeting because they had an outage, and like no one could actually tell you that person's name or what department they were in or what year it was. And I'm pretty sure it was, it was trying to hype you up to prepare for it. I think it was some, I don't know if they intentionally did this or it was just, a group, but like that's such a terrible, I think the blameless culture is big.
Yeah.
It's not to say that people can't be a problem, right? But I think often it's not the person that made the change that is actually the problem. It is someone's reviewing code, right? Like code review should be first class, not checking a box. I feel really bad when a change I reviewed caused an outage. It happened recently. I was like, oh, man, who approved this change? Oh, that was
never mind.
should have done better due diligence. And yeah,
I mean, it goes back even further than that, though, because if you do think that it is one person's responsibility that caused the problem, you can look at, well, what was the culture we had that allowed them to make the mistake, or why were they even hired, right? Were they a good fit for the role in the first place? And you can definitely go back up somewhere else or a different chain to really dive in there.
But some of those things you might not write. It's like a meta postmortem of
for sure.
How did we get here?
Right.
How did we end up hiring people that didn't understand networking for a networking product or whatever it was? I think that stuff's important. And then change the process, right? Okay, these are our new criteria for this.
For sure.
Yeah.
When I was in the Navy, we had this process for getting your certification for whatever job you were doing that I've tried to bring into pull request reviews, that it takes a cultural shift to get it fully implemented. But in the Navy, it was set up so that, like, I was a nuclear engineer, so you had to learn all these different skills to operate the power plant. And so you would go around the power plant and work with the existing engineers and show them that you knew how to do something. And if they felt like you understood it, they would sign it off in your book. And this was way back pre-computer stuff. So you actually had a physical book that you carried around, but you signed it off in that book. And then if at any point in your career you ever screwed that task up to a point where your skills were called into question, they would open up the book to see who signed it and go back to that person and say, hey, why did Will screw this up? And so it was that, like, that it did put that sense of pressure on you, so that before you would sign off on anyone's book on anything, you wanted to make sure that you were reasonably confident that they actually knew what they were doing. And so I treat pull requests the same way. Like, if I approve a pull request and it breaks something, I don't consider that to be a fault with the person who submitted the pull request. I consider that to be my fault for not catching it in the review.
This is like the Erdos number corollary. There's the, you chase it back all the way up the chain. Like, well, who did that person, what does that person's book look like? The reviewer.
Right.
Who signed off and said you're,
who's patient zero.
Right, exactly.
Right.
No, I think that's a good way to look at it. And it's just good for accountability and, the meta issues.
Yeah. And like a one-off instance, is not that big a deal. But over time, if like everyone that I signed off on this particular skill is having problems, that's going to point back to the root cause being me not actually understanding either what the skill is or how to evaluate that skill.
Yeah. I've been places where the root cause has just been fatigue. It's like these on-call rotations are too insane. This was at the end of this person covered someone else's on-call. They were on 2 weeks of 24/7 on-call. They had a bunch of major incidents overnight. They were running on no sleep, and they just simply did the wrong thing. You can't fault the human for that. Like, why do we put them in this grinder? Like every other industry, like the airline industry is a great one, right? You have limits on how much you can fly and be responsible for people's lives. I mean, obviously when lives are at stake, like you said, you have to be more rigorous, but it doesn't have to be that rigorous for, being on call. But, we have an informal policy on our team is if we take overnight pages, someone will offer to cover the next night, so that person can catch up.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than having a week of terror where you're losing sleep every night. Like you're dead by third. And then a major incident, the worst timing always happens in these things, right? Like the worst outages are never one thing. It's a confluence of events, right? So that terrible outage is going to come Friday when you're running on fumes and just your brain isn't there. And you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to see problems, and that's not your fault. But that's tough to, in the startup world, like, oh yes, you're meant to grind, but there has to be some reasonableness of, okay, the people with responsibility for keeping the site up need to be aware and awake, because we're not just running run books where we copy and paste stuff. It's the run book is use your brain.
Yeah.
I think we really realized over at least the most recent decade that the grind is not helpful. Even like doing more hours of work, especially in knowledge work industry, does not translate to an additional value. And so if you do have outages incidents every day that people are on, it seems like fundamental that you would intentionally rotate them off so that someone else is there. I think there's like a pride issue here where the engineer just wants to stay on because, it's their rotation, and they don't realize that it's actually harming the company. Like they should speak up for the benefit of the company. It's not about them necessarily.
Right. Heroics shouldn't be, it's great. Sometimes heroics just have to happen and they happen and it's good, but that shouldn't be the goal of like, oh man, I want to be a hero this outage. Please no. Like it was really fun early in my career, and now it's like, oh, there's heroics happening. This is awful.
Yeah, it's the cult of the hero, because then you fulfill that hero role, and then you get mentioned in Slack, and everyone's like, oh wow, that was such a tough effort,
and the worst the worst word used in HR, rock star.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to be a rock star at work, man. Like, please no. I want to do
if I'm going to be a rock star, I want it to be on Motley Crue, fueled by cocaine and hookers.
Right. Let me be a rock star. Like being a rock star in infrastructure is like, ugh.
Yeah.
This is not what I
Where's my hotel room to tear up?
Yeah. In the beginning it was, they described me as a rock star. That must mean I'm doing great. And now it's like, ooh.
Yeah, right. Now it's like, watch your mouth.
Yeah. Don't call me that. But I think the culture is, I don't know. It's a tough one to you don't want to actively discourage it. You don't want to say log off and go home. Like if you want to work, I don't know. My thing is like, I'm a workaholic, and I always say I'm happy to work long hours if it's what I want to do. If I want to work on Saturday, awesome. If other people want me to work on Saturday, kind of falls apart for me. And the social engineering trick is there. Well, just keep work that he really likes and is passionate about, and he'll work on Saturday. That's a fine, okay, that's a good trick. It works on me. But I don't think people abuse that. And some weekends I game all weekend. Some weekends I work all weekend. But usually it's my choice.
You make a really good point about that.
I think part of that is that we are creative in the work that we do, using our creativity to solve problems, and creativity doesn't show up at 9 a.m. when you hit the time clock, and if it's something that you're excited about and you get this, that creative burst, like, oh, I got to go do this, which is what leads you to go in and work on Saturday.
Most of my best work is done after midnight or on the weekends. Like it's exactly that. Is you get the idea and you're like, man, you're laying in bed and you're like, I can build it this way, that way. It's like, I just got to build it, right? Like,
I know what always fueled me was there was some really annoying problem that I did, like some other problem I didn't want to have to solve. Like someone was asking ridiculous things on how to fix Jenkins, and the solution was something I didn't want them to do. And so I felt the need, motivated to just have this problem completely go away. And that's when I would really work on things like nonstop.
Well, it's nerd sniping, right? Someone said it can't be done.
For sure.
Like, can't be done. See you Monday, right? I'm like, here it is. But I think the other problem with that is it has to be clear on the team that that's happening. Like some people just don't ever work weekends. I think that's great. Like, that shouldn't be a problem. So it shouldn't be a peer pressure of like, oh, Pete worked the weekend, everyone else should. Like, I think that is a terrible message to send. So you have to be careful with it. Like, I've learned not to send too many emails. Well, I don't work. Luckily, the company I work at is not an email company, but at like big companies where email is life, I'm always very careful about sending emails on the weekend because you're implicitly setting expectations for other people that are watching, and I feel like that is trouble.
Yeah, I mean, that's another avenue, realistically. Like, I think there is a thing about, just like you want the load on your systems to be constant, you don't want to see spikes because they're incredibly hard to deal with. The same goes for teams that are putting out work, right? If some engineers are incredibly spiky on load, then you're unpredictable in what you can deliver and how much and the reliability or quality of that. So you're not necessarily doing anyone a favor by one day going out and solving a problem if that's your pattern.
Yeah,
and I think it's a difficult lesson for a lot of people to learn.
I struggle with it a lot. I often find myself like, I'll work a weekend because I want to, and then Monday I'm like, oh man, I don't want to work today. Like,
yeah.
Well, that's fine, right? Because
Yeah.
then you're still having the same amount of work that you're sort of putting out and productivity for the team, but you're not overburning them because someone still has to review that, right? Someone that's still creating follow-up work down the road, and depending on the state you're in, maybe that creates incidents as well.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a very tough balance to figure out. I'm still trying to figure out what that is. I would say my whole career is pretty spiky. There are some places I work at where I'm always, I can't help the workaholic in me, but there are some places where I chill a little more and some places where I'm like 80-hour weeks insanity. And I don't know, for me, I've learned it's a healthy cycle. Like every couple jobs I do the insane grind because that's just where I'm at. And then I have a couple years of like less insane grind, kind of relax and find other things to do, and then right back to it because I miss it.
I mean, it doesn't matter what your pattern is. I mean, if you are spiky, it's fine as long as it's somehow consistent, right? If every couple of weekend, every other weekend you do extra work, then you sort of expect that into the realm of things and how that's going to play out. But if it happens and it's unpredictable, then you don't know what the impact is on the team. You may think that the team can get more work done than is reasonable. And so a new big project comes out and now it's taking even longer or unexpected because Pete's not pulling those weekends anymore and doing a real job that has a lot of value, but messed up some sort of prediction or timelines or deadlines.
Yeah, I think engineering time prediction is like the hardest.
Oh yeah, just throw that out the window.
Yeah, it's how long will this take? I don't know. Especially with infra, right? Well, it's 2 weeks of infra work. Oh, so it'll be done in 2 weeks? Maybe. Like 2 weeks of infra work sometimes takes 2 months with outages and interrupts, and it's hard to explain sometimes.
Yeah, it's like Einstein's theory of relativity is real. The faster we go, the slower we go. No, but going back to your talk about working in spikes, I think that's how we've worked as humans for 40,000 years. Like you go out and you do the big grind to hunt the animals, and then you go back and you just you rest and you relax for a while, or you go out and you work all summer to plant the crops and harvest the crops and then store them for the winter, and then you ride the winter out. So I think that behavior is actually something that has been native to us for a long, long time, and to try to break that in the course of a 3-decade career is going to be difficult.
No, I mean, you're onto something there. Definitely. One of you called it art, right? So you look at the Renaissance artists, famous ones, like, see what they did. What are other artists doing before and even today? How are they working? Because that's the same expectation you can have for any knowledge work, which is very similar to a creative process.
You have to have the right motivation, and sometimes that's really hard to figure. I don't know what that is sometimes, right? Some weekends I want to be a potato and stare at a screen, and some weekends I wake up early on a Saturday and I'm like, let's write some code, let's do stuff. And I have no idea what drives it. And sometimes I know, but often it's just, I don't know. It's hard to say how I'm feeling or will feel until I actually wake up and decide what to do.
For sure. I think if we figure that out and can define it and reproduce it, we've got our next multi-billion-dollar startup.
Seriously.
Awesome. Is there anything else we should talk about for internal platforms, the philosophy of infrastructure?
I think we covered a lot. I think that
Yeah,
all the things I want to talk about.
awesome. Cool. Well, let's do some picks. Warren, I've been picking on you for picks the last couple of episodes, but I gave Pete a heads up before we started recording, so I know he's prepped. So I'm going to put Pete on the spot. What'd you bring for us, Pete?
I'm a gamer, and I like I don't know. I like games that are really hard. I like games that are kind of like a second job and grindy. And I don't know. I'm just a glutton for punishment, I guess, is the summary. Some people play games just to have casual. I have some casual, hang out with the boys and play some games kind of thing. But I like a spreadsheet on the second monitor and gaming on the first monitor kind of thing. So I really like ARPGs, hack and slash. Anything where you can min max is just
interesting,
up my alley. New game came out. I don't know. I think it went full release 10 days ago. It's been around for years and like betas and alphas. It's called Last Epoch. It's like a Diablo-ish ARPG thing. And there's Diablo. I played a lot of Diablo. There's PoE, which is like the ultimate, like I don't have enough hours to. I'm also like a very addictive personality, so I have to choose my games. I don't play Factorio because I know that I would just stop working. But like Last Epoch is this nice middle of, it's a lot more complex than Diablo. There's a lot more things that can contribute to your final build that you can nerd out on trying this and trying that. There's a lot of RNG, so there's the grindy aspect of it. It just checks all the boxes. And for me, I know a game is good when I lose track of time. I'm constantly like, oh, it's 3 a.m. I should go to bed now. That's been like the last week and a half since the game came out. And so that is my pick. If you like ARPGs or min-maxing games or things like that, this game just checks all the boxes for me. It's written by gamers. Sometimes you play a game and it's pretty clear that the people that wrote it don't actually play the game they've written. It's actually way more common than you think. And you realize because there's no quality of life features and it's like, well, this is awkward and I have to do it every 2 raids and this sucks. This game just like, oh, I have to do this thing. Oh, wait, this is really easy to do. Like, okay, you just do, like someone plays the game, wrote the game. So yeah, I enjoy a game like that. It's a small indie company, so props to them.
Is there an online multiplayer mode for it?
Yeah. So it's like a whole, when you go to the common areas, there's a bunch of other people there and there's trading and stuff. And there's, public chat where, half trolling, half people asking questions, but you can party up with your buddies and tackle content together. And so I have a small group I play with, and we've always played ARPGs. So this is our current one that we're all just kind of grinding up characters on and figuring out what the best builds are and what synergizes with each other and things like that.
All right. So the follow-up question is, do you want to share your gamer tag so that any listener to the show can jump on and talk trash?
Yeah, I'm Pete F backwards. Fatep.
All right.
Someone out there has Pete F places, so I'm backwards Pete F.
I am Pete F.
Yeah, when you said difficulty, I thought for sure you were going to bring up Lost Souls or Dark Souls. And
so yeah, that kind of game, if I was good at, I would play.
I don't think anyone's good at it.
No, the whole like the those kind of games where it's like jumping mechanics and stuff. I don't know. I'm just that stuff.
He's not a platformer. That's it. Yeah, I mean, really twitchy games. Yeah, I'm totally with you. I played Ninja Gaiden a lot in the past, and like that was there were some parts that were incredibly challenging.
The Last Epoch has enough of that. Like some of the boss fights are legitimately challenging. There's one dude we fought probably 40 times in a row before we beat him, but now we're really good at it because we post-mortem each death. Okay, and he does this thing. You can't stand in the middle, right? Like it really, where games are worked, right? Like it's.
I think that's the real lesson. You really have to take root cause analysis and postmortems to your private life, and in your friend group, when something goes wrong, you really need to investigate.
I often joke that like many things about me are really good for work and really terrible for personal relationships, but they work out really well in gaming. So.
Right.
Root causing relationship problems, usually a bad idea. Root causing why you die to a boss, awesome. Apply it where you can.
Fair enough. All right, Warren, what'd you bring this week?
Yeah, so a couple weeks ago I mentioned this already, but I'm going to plug it again. On Friday, there's a decompiled conference in Dresden, Germany, which I'm actually giving a talk on about our journey at Authris and adding security. But there are some interesting talks there. Like there's one that I really want to go to that's about migrating from Kubernetes to serverless. And I think there are a bunch of other ones that are really interesting that I'm looking forward to.
Nice.
Excellent. Cool. So my pick's going to be no surprise to anyone who's been listening to the last few episodes. I am picking Platform Con, coming out in June. It's a 5-day virtual conference about platform engineering. So check it out, totally free. And there's going to be tons of great talks there. And specific to me, at the end of the conference, I will be doing a live Q&A session with some of the speakers. So they're finalizing who the speakers are going to be. And then once that's done, I am going to try and turn this into a Q&A session that you actually want to listen to. So I'm going to go out on X and start asking people, which speakers do you want me to interview and what questions do you want me to ask them so that it becomes the interview that you want to hear. And yes, I know that by going out on X and asking you what questions to ask, some of you are going to ask some of the wrong questions. So I'm just going to be honest here with you. I'm not going to ask that. But thank you for listening to the show, you sick little pervert. And so whenever the Q&A session comes up, I will ask the questions, some of them, because we know what you're going to ask. But I will ask some of them, and then you will be able to say, hey, I heard about this on the X, which takes it full circle because I did go through that whole setup just to walk all the way through and plug a ZZ Top song in my pick for today. So all of you listeners who are ZZ Top fans out there, that was all done for you. Thanks for listening. Cool. So I think we got an episode here.
Awesome.
Yeah, Pete, thanks for joining us. This has been a great talk. It's super fun to have you on the show.
Yeah. Thank you for having me again. This was great.
Yeah, anytime. Warren, thanks again for joining me as a co-host here.
Yeah, of course.
Love having you on the show. It's been a lot of fun. Look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah.
And for all you listeners out there, we will see y'all next week too. Thanks, everyone.